Welcome to Empathy Corner, Conversations with Toad Counselling. I'm your host Tony Matthews, and joining me today is Anna. We're going to be talking about depression and anxiety, and in order to get things rolling, a brief description as to what depression and anxiety is. Depression is a mental health disorder characterised by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and a lack of interest in activities previously enjoyed. It can cause physical symptoms like fatigue, changes in appetite and sleep, and also difficulties with concentration. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a feeling of unease, worry or fear that can be related to specific situations or events, or it can be generalised and present almost all the time, which it can be for a lot of people. It can cause physical symptoms like rapid heartbeats, sweating, and for some people difficulties breathing, which can lead to panic attacks or anxiety attacks. Both depression and anxiety can significantly impact everybody or anybody's daily life, and it can also require professional intervention to help manage things effectively. With me today is Anna. Hello, Anna.
Morning.
With depression and anxiety, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with depression and anxiety and the impact that it's had on your life, either from childhood to adulthood or whenever you feel it started?
I don't think I've ever lived without depression, quite frankly. Depression has always been a part of my life. My background, I was born into a large family who, my mother was a Jehovah's Witness, but not the rest of the family. I was the youngest child, so I was seen as last resort of trying to get me to stay in the religion. So certainly the first 10 to 12 years of my life, I was fed nothing more than cult believings, if you like, and any questioning of those cult believings was taken as, no, you can't. But also the relationship in my parents' household was very unloving. It was very much the 1950s type scenario. Man went out to work and he did nothing when he came home, and my mother was she did everything: cooking, cleaning, running the books for the business, absolutely everything, all of the time. As a child, I wasn't allowed to have friends, in inverted commas. They were seen as sinners if they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, and certainly in the small village I lived in, there weren't any other Jehovah's Witness children. There was one, which was my cousin, but sort of certainly for the first 10 to 12 years of my life, the only friends I had were the dogs at home. So I missed out on a lot of childhood milestones, etc. And I've had to learn to do that as an adult, and it's just been quite the challenge. When I was 12 years old, I was gang raped by 5 men, held down and raped by each one of them. I never got justice for that, because certainly in my mum's religion, it was seen as no sex before marriage and those kind of things. But certainly when I was growing up as well, that kind of thing you didn't hear about. It wasn't talked about. My best friend from school recently said to me, I wish I'd known how to tell people, because I told her about it at school. These days I would hope that schools encourage that kind of open dialogue, if you like. But certainly when I was growing up, it was a bad thing. It was a taboo subject. It wasn't something you did. Because already in the Jehovah's Witnesses I had experienced sexual assault by the elders. I already knew it was wrong, and when I told my mother about it, I was the lying she-devil Jezebel. So I pretty much knew I'd get the same reaction. So never piped up about it and tried to cope with it by writing in a journal, which I used to do when I was a teenager. And one particular evening when I was about 13, I got drunk on homemade tomato wine.
Tomato wine?
Tomato wine.
Wow.
Always vile stuff.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Don't like tomatoes as it is.
And fell down the stairs at home, which ensued that my mother and brother sort of picked me up off the floor and, dealt with me, in inverted commas. And my brother, that particular night, found my journal and showed it to my mother.
Yeah.
Who she read, and immediately I was the Jezebel, she-devil, you name the insult, I got it. I spent 3 days in my room with no food and no water. And
in your journal, you describe what had happened
as a nice thing, as if it was a romantic thing with a boy at school that I had a bit of a thing for. So, but nobody asked me why I'd done that, why.
Can I ask you that question?
Yeah.
What was the reason you portrayed it like that in the journal at that age?
Because I wanted it to be, I guess, positive. Tried to make it into some kind of positive, an escape, if you like, in my head, somehow, of relating it, because certainly as a child I was never allowed to watch things that sinners were allowed to watch. So I only got the sort of whimsical TV that was on in those days, like All Creatures Great and Small and that kind of thing. So, there was never any of the hard-hitting stuff that I was ever allowed to watch. So, in my eyes, I guess I was trying to make it sound nice and pleasant and make it into something it wasn't. But I had nobody else to talk to about it. I had nobody else I didn't know I could.
Yeah.
Certainly from my mother's refusal to even acknowledge the sexual assaults I'd suffered.
Had you known about the sexual assaults as you'd explain them, or was it just through the journal that your brother had found and shared?
No, the sexual assaults I told my mum when I was 6 or 7, but again, I was just a Jezebel. Men of that stature don't do that kind of thing.
And that was while Mum was part of the Jehovah's Witness community?
Absolutely, yeah. And it was, I tried when I was 18, 19 to kind of address that through the criminal justice system, but they closed ranks. And I've never had justice for that.
Yeah.
I've never had justice for the rape either, or that rape anyway. I started smoking at age 12. I got in with the wrong type of people in school and in my local village, did all sorts compared to these days, it was compared to these days, it's not a lot, but knocking and running and chucking flour and eggs at people's houses, that kind of thing, just generally being a misbehaving teenager.
I remember.
I used to try and escape from the house.
Yeah.
So, my mum would be hanging on to my Doc Martens on the end of my feet as I'm trying to climb out the window. My 3 older brothers, all they could see was their annoying little sister who didn't do as she was told. And again, I'll reiterate, nobody ever asked the question why I was behaving like I did.
Yeah.
Nobody ever asked me why. Nobody ever. But back in those days, in the 80s and early 90s, mental health wasn't talked about. It was still very stigmatised of the institutionalised, lock people up, throw away the key type attitude, and it wasn't till sort of late 80s, early 90s they started to separate mental health from learning disabilities. And it certainly in my schools, things like that were not talked about. You know, there was none of the... I know now in my son's school they have a talk every year from the NSPCC about stranger contacts and what's right and what's not right about touching and all sorts of things. So I'm glad that's moved on.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing like that when I was growing up, and I didn't know that I already had depression because I didn't know what it was. Again, my mother's generation, it was you get on with it.
Yeah.
You don't let life get in your way per se. You just pick the carpet up, sweep it under, carry on.
Yeah.
There was no opportunity to talk about things.
You said the first assaults happened when you were around 6 years old. That's very young, you know. When it comes to the depression and anxiety side of things, how old would you say you were when you first noticed or maybe recognised that there was something wrong in regards to depression and anxiety?
Well, that took a long time, because as far as certainly my mother was concerned, and probably pretty much everyone else around me, it was my fault. It was who I was. It was my fault. You know, she's a batten. She's you know, I had all those things, and I didn't know what depression and anxiety was probably till the ages of 18, maybe 20.
Okay. So it's not something that was talked about at school and things like that when you were in secondary school?
Yeah, no, none of that kind of stuff was ever talked about.
Okay.
Nothing, never. And I wasn't aware, definitely, of depression probably till I was 16. It would have been mentioned by my GP, because I know that that's when I first went on antidepressants.
Okay.
But I wasn't educated about it. I didn't know what it was. And again, certainly right through until my 30s, the mental health mantra, in inverted commas, that came from the NHS was, well, you've got this problem, you've got to do this to get rid of it.
Yeah.
There was none of the, right, you've got these issues because of this, and this. It was always, it's your fault. It's your fault. You've got to improve it. And that I always found a big barrier. But that, I guess, is because of my upbringing and the way I was brought up, in that you can't talk about these things, so it's all inside, and it comes out in behaviours. In me in particular, in later life, it came out in sexualised behaviour.
When you say sexualised behaviour, what do you mean?
Certainly from my sort of teenage years, I wanted to find love, and pretty quick to get out of my situation, I think, looking back on things now.
Yeah.
So would engage in...
amorous sexual activities?
Yes.
Putting it simply.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay.
You know, and I was very lucky, one, to never get pregnant, and two, never to get any nasty diseases.
Yeah.
But again, I had no idea why I was doing this at the time. I only realise now, much later on in life, because I'm, 46 now.
Yeah.
So this is the times that I was growing up. You know, my parents had a garage. The most exposure I had to any sexualised behaviour of any description was my parents' garage. They had a boob calendar, in inverted commas, the workmen in the garage.
Yeah.
Because I'd been so isolated as a child from anything, I wasn't allowed to watch TV unless my mum had filtered it. So I only got the glossy side of life,
Yeah.
if via the TV per se, you know, was never allowed to. And I think there was also an element of kicking back at the establishment, because my mum was so, you're the Jezebel, etc., etc. So I was playing up to that label as well.
Yeah.
There was an element of that, you know, and this year I've been working in the job I'm working for 4 years, 3 to 4 years now.
Yeah.
It's probably the longest job I've had. Because I always ended up having some kind of outburst or meltdown, because I couldn't cope with things when things got too much.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how to cope with these things in life, because again, I wasn't taught by anybody around me any coping strategies. You know, I was, whenever I particularly remember saying to my mum as a child, I've got no friends, it makes me feel alone all the time. And I distinctly remember her saying to me, well, I've always been alone, so you have to be alone. And it's like, oh, what kind of an answer is that for a child asking how to make friends? As if my son asked me that now,
yeah.
I would do everything to try and help him be able to make new friends, and I'd take time to explain things to him about, you know, you talk about subjects that that might interest the other person, that kind of thing, to start conversations. I didn't have any of that. But there's also the other side of that coin is I used to get dragged around on the doorsteps, because the Jehovah's Witnesses go around knocking on people's doors, evangelising their religion. I distinctly remember instances of the door being slammed in the face, being sworn at, all sorts of horrible.
So was that you going around with mum or on your own?
No, with mum.
With mum.
Which in later years caused a lot of arguments between my mum and dad, because my dad had a local business, and if we'd go knocking on local people's doors,
yeah,
he was extremely embarrassed by any of that, any of it. And my brothers followed suit, and it, yeah.
What was your relationship like with your dad?
Non-existent, really. He was the bloke that went out and worked all day, and we did what we were told. He wasn't. My mum and dad's marriage was very much your 1950s. The man goes out to work, the woman stays at home, does the cooking and cleaning and everything else.
Yeah.
You know, my dad never lifted a finger in the house, never helped do anything. My mum in her 60s, she had to have a hysterectomy and couldn't do anything for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And my dad complained bitterly at having to push the Hoover around my house. Because, you know, he was very, very traditional. My mum and dad had me when they were 40.
Yeah.
And I was the youngest of 4 kids and the only girl.
Okay.
And I, again, distinctly remember my mum and my dad both telling me we was over the moon to have had a little girl. All we ever wanted was a little girl, and we got you. You're like the devil's child.
How old were you when they first told you that?
Probably 9, 10, maybe a little younger. They might have said it earlier, I don't know, but right. I definitely remember in my teenage years that being said to me.
How did that make you feel?
At the time, I couldn't tell you, but now Looking back, it tears strips of confidence off you.
Yeah.
But that sort of, that leads on into my later stages of life, in inverted commas. Because my dad was such a bully, and he was the type of man that if the tea wasn't on the table at 6 o'clock, he wouldn't talk to my mum for 2 weeks. Because of the behaviour he always displayed, that it was what we know now as controlling and coercive behaviour.
Yeah.
And that is also what the Jehovah's Witnesses installed in me from a very early age, is controlling and coercive behaviour.
Yeah.
You listen to what we say and you can't have your own thoughts about the world around you. That led me into relationships as a young adult of abusive men, because I didn't know any different. And there were 3 in particular. One raped me, one beat living daylights out of me and raped me with a gun. It killed my dog. Another one took dining chairs to me, beating me. And I put up with that because I thought I deserved that.
That's quite horrific. How did you manage?
Quite honestly, at times I really don't know.
Yeah.
I really honestly at times can't tell you how I got through things.
Something like that has quite an effect.
Yeah, very much.
Confidence, motivation, depression.
Confidence. I've always, as I've said many times in our sessions, I've never recognised anxiety. I've always been able to not have that awareness, and I think that's because I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And I've parcelled it in with everything else. I've never separated the anxiety from the depression, but I must have had it. I must have had the anxiety of, my boyfriend's coming home, what's going to happen this time? Is he going to get Mary out from under the bed? Is he going to rape me with that gun again? A lot of it, I think, I had until we started our sessions. I think a lot of it I had locked away and stamped on and refused to let it cow me. That is one thing I think has been my saving grace in my life, is that somewhere inside me, I don't know where it is sometimes, and I can't find it when I want it per se.
Yeah.
But there seems to be some kind of fight in me that comes out when it's needed, of I will not let this happen. I will not let people walk roughshod over me again. I will not let these people take my life anymore, take away. Because I've spent, there have been times where I've sat and contemplated suicide and how I'm going to do it, and how I always felt so alone. There was never anybody there to hug me, say it's okay, it's all right, it's okay for you to be emotional, it's okay to let these things out, that's okay. I never had that. I never had a friend that I could turn to like that. I never had a therapist who was prepared to sit and listen. I've told you about a previous therapist I saw who, when I became suicidal, within our sessions. She then refused to see me and told me my issues were too much for her to deal with.
Yeah.
That I distinctly remember making me feel even worse, and even that I would never get rid of all the things that are inside me that have got to get out. All the feelings, all the heartbreak, the loneliness, the making me, the feelings of worthlessness that practically every man in my life has ever made me feel. The hopelessness of the fact that it's never ever going to change. And the utter heartbreak when every relationship I had ended in such evil circumstances. With our sessions, I've been able to, with some security and the feeling of being safe, being able to explore and talk about specifically what those three men did to me. And they've all three of them have left physical scars, but the emotional scars that them alone have left me with, I don't think will ever go away, but certainly after being able to talk about them with you in a safe space. And that has been very, very important to me, the safe space. I have coming to terms with what happened to me and starting to understand that my early life and my childhood trauma and all the things that I was taught, in inverted commas, and how the things I was taught to cope with, it starts in very early childhood. I'm having to learn the coping mechanisms properly now.
So how do you manage your depression and your anxiety?
Nowadays, that fight that's somewhere inside me that comes out, that determination, that gives me the I can't think of the word, motivation. Yeah. Because people are never, ever going to do those things to me again, ever. And I am determined that I am going to show my young man, my little boy, the best ways I can to cope with any adverse things that happen to him in his life. And he's a big motivation that I will show him how to cope with life, rather than showing him how to sweep it under the carpet, basically.
Yeah.
He's a big motivation. And I one of the things that's more recently become apparent to me, that helping others also helps me. Helping others in their journeys. Because I now, for a job, work as an enabler.
Yeah.
Helping people out of their depression, anxiety, through their opening up about their traumas, and emotionally supporting them through making themselves in a better individual in whichever way they choose to do that.
Do you feel something like that helps you?
Yes.
Manage your anxiety and your depression as well?
Yes. because I see that teaching people also helps me to remember. It also helps me to remember and remind me that sitting and wallowing in bed all day or in front of the TV doing stuff it doesn't work. It makes you worse.
Yeah. Well, doing the work that you do, working with these people, enabling them, helping them manage their depression and their anxiety, must have an impact on you as well in regards to the things that you've gone through and the triggers that can come about and happen.
Oh, yes.
While you're out working with these people. How do you manage that?
Triggers, things that trigger me are a lot. I'm always hyper-vigilant, hyper-alert to people's reactions to things, especially if it's a situation where, I don't know, somebody's shouting to somebody in the street. Just somebody shouting in a loud voice sets my red alarm bells going.
Yeah.
And the anxiety starts to go up and up and up. I was shouted at a lot as a child, and certainly the 3 abusive relationships I went through was shouted at a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a big trigger. Managing it, the best ways I've found of managing it is basically talking to you in our sessions. But that has meant that I have been able to identify that I've even had the triggers, because before I wouldn't even have been able to say, right, my anxiety went through the roof because I heard somebody shouting in the street. That I wouldn't have been able to tell you that was the case.
So how has therapy, do you feel, helped you identify what's going on and how to manage and cope with things? What has therapy helped in that regard, in your support?
The support, knowing I've got a safe space to go to, and that I'm not going to melt down at home in front of my little boy and my wonderful husband. I'm not going to melt down in front of them. I'm not going to melt down in front of friends. I can, no offence Tony, but I can melt down in your office and know that I can leave it there in your office, and I don't have to take that home with me and churn the thoughts around in my head all night, or I've been able to let go, I guess, is in a healthy manner, because in years gone by, I would have got a pillow and whacked the absolute living bejesus out of it. I would have gone and got a stick and whacked a tree. I would have screamed, I would have yelled, I would have gone out into a field, literally into the middle of a field, and I would have got to my knees and I would have screamed and yelled. And I have done that many times.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way sometimes that the things have been able to come out. But I don't do that now.
So what do you do?
I come and talk to you. I come and talk to you. But talking about the things has made them less stressful isn't the word.
Overwhelming?
Yes. It's made them less overwhelming to me. I still have all the choo-choo train thoughts going around in my head, the typical depression and anxiety negative thought cycle that practically never stops, and I battle that on a daily basis, but it's a battle that I'm prepared to have because I know it can get better, and it has been getting better. My day isn't always full of my past thoughts now and my past actions and the things that have happened to me. I can think about daily life more now. I can plan things more now.
So what does happen with, just basic daily activities, cooking, cleaning, looking after the boys, obviously, your daily routines? How does it impact your daily life, your daily routines and activities when these thoughts do come in?
I stop doing it. It paralyses me.
Yeah. You shut
pretty
down?
much. Yeah. I go into shutdown.
Yeah.
I don't want to see people. I don't want to go out of the door. I don't want to talk to people. I had an episode probably a couple of months ago now where, just to let the listeners know, I'm also going through perimenopause, a stupid woman affliction. I had it was literally just a week of feeling just suicidal.
Yeah.
And I know it's because of the perimenopause, my hormone issues, but I could recognise it, whereas in the past I would have tried to just carry on and would have just tried to sit on all the feelings until they went away.
Did they go away, or did they just build up?
In me, they have a tendency to build up, but I am learning that talking about my feelings and talking about how I feel and what's made me feel that way helps a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't have to put that burden on my husband anymore, or my friends, because I know that I have you, a trained individual, who can sometimes help me understand, but also has the empathy, because I have always spoken candidly about the things that have happened to me. I've never made secrets of any of it. There are things that I've never spoken about, and it's only in recent sessions with yourself that I've been able to talk about at least 2 of the abusive relationships. I'd never spoken to anybody about them, and I've held that in for so long, and the relief I feel now from getting that out. Talking therapy for me has been a game changer.
Yeah.
Because effectively it's like going back to school and teaching my brain to function in a different way, make new connections of, okay, I got anxious because someone shouted in the street, so the way I'm going to deal with that is I'm going to talk about it so that the next time it happens it has less impact on me.
Yeah.
And genuinely I have you to thank an awful lot for that. It helps. It has helped immensely in the last 3 years to have an exceptionally understanding boss who the ways depression and anxiety, because of what's happened to me in life, has affected my life.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd held a job down for longer than a couple of years in any job. and having people who understand that what might be typical for somebody, for how somebody to react, and then I react in a different way, or and that the other person having that understanding and that empathy. There we go, empathy corner.
Mm-hmm.
Having that empathy, that I have found really supportive, and certainly in terms of my boss, the peer support model that she uses with her own experiences has helped me, and that helps me in my job, because I am doing with other individuals. It's helped me help other people. I don't know if that's all making sense to you now or not.
You get a lot of support,
which I've never had before.
From your workplace, from your boss.
Yes.
And that helps
immensely.
With the anxiety.
Yes. Very much so. But also with the confidence. You know, my confidence throughout my life. Sometimes I wonder how the hell I've got to the age I've got without being in jail or somewhere. Until I met my wonderful husband 13 years ago, I didn't have anybody who supported me for who I was and let me be who I wanted to be. My mum wanted me to be that 1950s housewife.
Yeah. Well, that's all she's ever known, isn't it?
That was all she ever knew. She wanted me to do that, be that person. Christ knows who my dad wanted me to be. You know, my brothers just saw me as their lying, annoying little sister, and I'll never be viewed as anything else. They would never understand the things I've gone through. My youngest brother, he pushed me through the front door, glass front door I might add. He burnt me with a car cigarette lighter about the age of 2. On a daily basis, he hit me, kicked me, spat at me, told me I was every name under the sun.
Yeah.
My dad told me on a daily basis, you're fat, you're useless, you're never going to come to anything, your mouth's going to get you in trouble. Nobody was ever positive with me. Everybody pointed out what was wrong, but didn't give me any way to correct it.
And that all changed 13 years ago.
Yeah, because my husband, the wonderful man that he is, and all the crap that he puts up with from me, he lets me be me.
It must be a wonderful feeling to be able to just be you.
Yeah. And I've told you this in probably quite a few sessions, that sometimes I really don't know who I am. Sometimes the way my brain works or does the thought choo-choo train, it's been hard to recognise who I am, because I've always been told you're the badass, you're the black sheep, you're the naughty girl, you're a bad one. Negative.
Yeah.
There have been people in my life who have encouraged me, but I didn't have the skills to recognise that that's what they were doing. Like when I was in Young Farmers, there was a wonderful man who was the county organiser. He encouraged me to do as much as possible. He was a very positive man. He encouraged me, and because of my life as a Jehovah's Witness and never being allowed to do anything, I did everything I could.
Yeah.
I played all the sports, I did all the competitions, I fully immersed myself in Young Farmers' life, and in some ways that I think was a bit of a saving grace for me, because it meant I didn't get in with
The bad crowds.
the bad crowds.
Yeah.
But there were bad enough crowds in Young Farmers, believe me, but not those kind of bad crowds.
Yeah.
So in some respects, that was a kind of saving grace. And it was only in my mid-20s, I think, that mental health in general was starting to be talked about. And to be fair, it was through Young Farmers probably that I probably came across it first.
Yeah.
Because there was a big campaign run by the National Farmers Union and Young Farmers about suicidality amongst farmers, because it is a very lone, isolated job, and it does happen a lot, and in Young Farmers, and there were 3 suicides in my 15-year span of their being in Young Farmers, and they were all pleasant enough chaps who, again, lived quite negative lives, because farmers tend to be very isolated, but they were taught bad coping mechanisms and unhealthy ways to let their emotions out, i.e. having alcohol.
Yeah.
Which thankfully since my Young Farmers years I've not had a lot of, because it doesn't do me any good. You know, there were positive experiences in Young Farmers that will stay with me for life.
Yeah.
Because I achieved things. Because again, as a young child, certainly in primary school, I wasn't allowed to have my education, in inverted commas. My mother told the school that anything of any religious connotation, I was to be taken out of class. I went to a Church of England school, so that was a lot. So I spent a lot of time in the small school library. Read a lot of books though. Love Roald Dahl because of that. But I haven't been able to recognise any of those things until I come into the sessions with yourself.
Yeah.
Which, having lived nearly 40 odd years thinking everything's my fault, it's me, it's my personality, but god damn it, no it isn't. It's what people have done to me. They've stamped on me, trodden on me, walked all over me, told me it's my fault. That's been hard, realising that actually, no, it's not me. It is what other people have done to me. And I don't care if that sounds selfish. It just made me feel selfish saying it.
You're allowed to be selfish.
I'm not,
It's allowed.
not the selfish type.
When it comes to you and your own health and the things that you want to do, of course you're allowed to be selfish.
But they see, look, prime example, thinking it's my fault. And it's my it's going to take a while for me to work through everything that has happened to me in my life. In the early 2010s, I tried to deal with it, and I sought help from the NHS, and that didn't go well.
So what advice would you give to our listeners and our potential listeners in regards to seeking help, advice, what sort of support?
Number one, stop telling yourself it's your fault, because it isn't. It's the coping mechanisms you've been taught.
Yeah.
And find healthy ways for your emotions to come out. That's the advice I would give to people. Find healthy ways, because it's the unhealthy ways, like the drugs, the alcohol, the unhealthy ways that people use to manage that, in a way, I have managed to avoid. Christ knows how. But that is the biggest piece of advice I'll give to people. Seek therapy, talking therapy. I have been on medication for probably a good 25 years of my life. I have had periods of it. It's not a long-term thing. In the short term, if you need it, take it. But in the long term, it's hard work, but it's rewarding at the end of it. Because I am starting to reap some of the rewards now of talking about the things. I'm less afraid of daily life. I'm less afraid of where life's going to take me now. I'm less afraid of life, in inverted commas. So seeking help is the very most important thing I think that I have done to help myself. And listening and being able to understand that some of the things I have done in life, yes, they've been wrong, or it's been the emotions come out in the wrong way, but it's not necessarily my fault, and there are ways that I can improve things. And I hope that that's a positive message. And also, don't lose your fight. I think there's a couple of times when I have lost my fight, and I have tried to take my own life, but I've known in the back of my head that it's the wrong thing to do, and it's the doctors and nurses in A&E on 2 occasions I have to thank for my life.
Yeah.
Don't isolate yourself is also a piece of advice. You know, talk to your family, talk to your friends. I haven't got either. I do have friends now. But it's going to be a long journey.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been seeing you, a couple of years now?
Something like that.
So, there's lots more to unpack, but I am a better woman for it. I hope, anyway.
We've pretty much reached our time, so I'd like to thank you very much for coming in and sharing your story. I mean, some of the things that you've gone through in your life are pretty horrific.
Yeah.
The way that you've managed and coped and dealt with things, I commend you for that. It's some hard things to go through. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of that journey as well. So thank you very much for sharing your story and having the courage to be able to share that with our listeners today as well.
The one thing I will say, my motivation for doing this today is so that anybody who's had similar experiences would be able to voice them.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a voice. But now I do.
Very much so.
Yeah.
We'll have some resources and contact information for help and support in the description of the podcast when it's released. Thank you for coming in, and
thank you for inviting me.
thank you everybody for listening.